Welcome back to After Dinner Chats, episode 4 of this podcast series, which I created to introduce some of the amazing, interesting, and off-the-wall people that have graced the table at the next dinner party. Yes, this is the only show brave enough to invite the industry's chief prosecutor to dinner. Of course, Tim was an original to TNDP, the next dinner party, back in 2007, a year or so after both he and I arrived in Sydney me from the UK and Tim from the Middle East. Today, I'm going to head with Tim, the man who's built his reputation by dissecting the deals and conflicts and characters of the media world. He's the founder of Mumbrella in Australia and the man behind Unmade. He's based in Tasmania and in Sydney. He's often in London for events like MadFest. He's the industry agitator who has issues with big agencies, and he's the watchdog who sniffs out the bad actors from the top of the long to the bottom of the long tail. In his world, everyone could be getting ripped off less, and he's the only one with a map to safety. My words, not his. Is he a righteous champion for transparency or just the industry's most dedicated heckler? We're about to find out. This isn't just a chat, it's a cross-examination, and let's see who's cross-examining whom.
This episode is brought to you by jobsandadtech.com, the only jobs board dedicated to digital media and the ad tech industry. If you're hiring now, use promo code JWPOD, JWPOD, for a 10% discount on any package. Jobsinadtech.com, it's where ad techers go to find their next role.
Tim, hello.
Sir James, how nice to join you from chilly Tasmania.
Great to catch up. I would love to launch straight in, if I may. What's been in the news this week that's caught your eye?
I suppose one of the things I found myself kind of thinking about, because to me it felt like some sort of changing of the guard or ending of an era, was David Droga announcing that he will be stepping down fairly soon as CEO of Accenture Song. As I speak to you in Australia, he, I suppose, is Australia's most famous, certainly most successful advertising export, having ended up in New York and launching Droga 5 over there, where it became one of the great advertising agencies, certainly one of the most award-winning, before then doing that marvelous thing of selling it twice. So once to William Morris Endeavour, the kind of talent agency, which I suppose rode one wave, and then when that wave went out again, helping kind of then mastermind the sale to Accenture, where he's definitely ridden that wave, where the consultancies joined the race towards creativity plus data plus consulting.
And shook up the world. So all of the traditional agencies have kept their eyes firmly on Accenture Song and the other consultancies that are cutting their grass.
Yeah, it's been a sort of fascinating experiment, really, because it felt to me, sort of particularly where I was in Australia, that there was a moment when all of the consultancies were using Australia as a kind of experimental base, where they were all buying agencies or hiring in teams and really trying to wave some sort of effectiveness flag, and at the very least kind of find a way into the kind of the C of the C-suite of the chief marketing officer.
Is he going to step away totally from Accenture? I thought he was going to stay in there as something for a while.
Yeah, that's right. So he'll step back from the big job, but stay vice something or the other. One of those honorary things. It's a bit like when someone's the boss of a big agency and they announce that they're going to be chairman or chairman emeritus, and we all know that's keep the relationships going with the clients for a while whilst gradually slipping away, and not cluttering up the place too much for the actual CEO. So it will be some version of that, but it certainly strikes me that Accenture would be smart to try and keep him within the family, because as much as anything, I don't think he will, but he'd be young enough to start another agency if he wanted to.
It was a great stepping stone. Stepping stone's the wrong word. It was a great, massive step for Droga with the Accenture relationship, because Droga, the agency on its own, it launched and closed again in Sydney, didn't it? And in its home market.
Yeah, that's correct. Which was sometime after it had great success in New York, but I think they just made some mistakes in the kind of the choices of team, particularly the creative lead locally the first time around. And then, of course, the second time around, Accenture had bought a really good Australian agency, The Monkeys, which these days The Monkeys has since rebranded as Droga 5. So he got there the second time around, and all he had to do was to sell to Accenture to get there.
That's hilarious. Yes, Three Drunk Monkeys.
That's how they started. That's right. They started as Three Drunk Monkeys. Then they won Diageo as a client, so rather boringly rebranded as The Monkeys, and have now rebranded as Droga 5. And no doubt now that David Droga will one day be out of the business, one day no doubt the agency will just be called Accenture Song as well. So that is the one thing that I think we're all cursed with working in this industry, is that once you go anywhere near a holdco or consultancy, your agency is going to change its name and become with each change progressively more bland.
Ouch. Well, I mean, that's happened. I at one of the dinners recently, someone pointed out to me that, James, everywhere that you've worked seems to have gone out of business some years later. So there was, Visium and Y&R and then just recently with Acceleration, which is now part of the choreograph team at WPP. I was like, well, I don't think it's because of me. I wasn't there then, right?
No, that's true. No, and wire and plastic products, where are they now?
Are we still making shopping trolleys? I don't know. So what I'd love to do, Tim, is pivot to the next question, if I may. We call these the Ripped Off Less series. I'd love to hear about what you're doing with both Mumbrella and Unmade in the way of keeping everybody more honest.
Oh gosh, look, I suppose the thing is we're, I guess what we try and organise ourselves in the market, as any trade press should, is put our audience at the centre. So much as we love love writing about the powers that be and talking with them, we're not writing for them. Similarly, much as we love our advertisers, we're not writing them, we're writing for the audience. So that means that we're kind of in favour of a better industry for everyone, and that includes a kind of fairer industry for everyone. At the moment, that feels like a lot of the conversation is around where the dollars leak out of the advertising supply chain, and particularly when that comes to programmatic. It feels like the conversations increasingly end up talking about Google somewhere in the conversation, and that one is, as it often is being tested in the courts at the moment, including in the US around at the very least kind of allegedly monopolistic behavior when it comes to the likes of Google in the advertising supply chain. Been lots of conversations around that at the government level in Australia as well. But yeah, in the end, so much of it is just encouraging marketers to ask hard questions of their media agencies about how are they spending their dollars, and do they understand where the dollars are going in that supply chain, and hey, what the hell is this principal media thing you're trying to sell us?
Ad fraud.
I'm against it, James.
Where do you stand on ad fraud? Was not going to be my question. Thanks for that, Tim. My question is, whose responsibility is it? Is it the agencies? Is it the advertisers? Is it the supply side? Where does the culpability lie at the moment in your eyes? Where should one start to address it?
Well, I suppose if you were to think about the CEO brand side, they would say that they're employing their chief marketing officer to spend their budgets wisely. So clearly, ultimately, it sits with the marketers, but they then have their trusted partners. At least part of that is media agencies for both the planning and the buying. Now, they might well employ media auditors and all of those things, but ultimately it feels like the one relationship that should be a trusted relationship is that one between media agency and marketer. And that, I suppose, is, I joked about principal media earlier, but I personally do see this as a massive conflict of interest. I can't see how, I mean, the word is agency. In theory, they're the agent of the client, representing only the best interests of the client. And for me, principal media feels like a massive conflict of interest when they're going to end up selling something to the client as well. I don't think you can actually effectively run both races. So that for me really potentially damages the trusting relationship. But of course, ultimately the client needs to ask the right questions about that. So ultimately, they have to be the owner of not getting their brand ripped off. So they have to ask the hard questions. And if they're not satisfied with the answers to the questions, then they're probably not working with the right people and should do something about that.
What about on the supply side? Is that changing in your eyes? Where do you think that the individual outlets can make a difference?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose one of the issues on the supply side is there's always fraud on the supply side, and if there's a boom, there's a fraud. So we're obviously seeing a lot of conversations at the moment around connected TV, where that appears to be a way where money can be siphoned out. We're also hearing, I remember talking to someone from the Double Verify Fraud Lab, and they were talking about how audio is another place where they've identified fraud going on. Now, of course, the problem is the media organizations we would have heard of, or the brands, those outlets, if we've heard of them, then they're probably not the cause of the problem. Usually it's the kind of the bad actors, somewhere the other side of the world where we don't even necessarily know where they are, who are purporting to be these people. It's more of a rarity that a media brand you'd heard of would be indulging in kind of wholesale fraud.
Down the long tail then is where the problem lies. So the aggregators and the ad networks are the ones that can then make sure that the advertisers are only placing their ads in places that are brand safe.
It's it's a bit like The Big Short. It's that collateralized media. Again, we come back, funnily enough, to principal media as well. When we have this package of stuff, it's when you don't actually know where your ad is running. That's when you're probably going to get ripped off.
Well, transparency is key, and then making sure that you're measuring the right things. And I think measurement is a large part of it as well. We've been measuring the things that are easy to measure rather than trying to go a little bit harder and measure the things that actually matter to the CFO and to the brand over the long term as well. So rather than just the short-term metrics or the immediate metrics of the click, then I think there's a lot more that we could be measuring to see how we're being effective with it across the board.
And of course, measuring beyond, beyond silos as well. This is one of the criticisms of the walled gardens of all the platforms. Is great, you can measure it, but only, well, A, they're marking their own homework, and B, it's within that very one controlled environment, so it doesn't give the whole picture.
I think that the measurement side of things is going to advance rapidly as we get more savvy with our quantum computing and start to look at ways across the different ways of using artificial intelligence. I was going to try and avoid that word, that expression.
I'm glad that you've mentioned quantum computing, because I've been wanting to find someone who can explain in layman's terms how quantum computing is going to affect the advertising industry. So I'm glad that you're the person.
Oh, awesome.
I love how you're explain.
Back at me. I would love to answer that question on your pod, Tim. And I look forward to doing that when you invite me on very soon. I'll have to get permission from WPP to stand forward as that. I'm going to jump now to the high five questions, if I may. You see how I got out of that question, Tim?
Oh, yes, completely seamlessly, James. Nobody will notice.
That segue. Professionalism is my middle name. Tim, your hero.
I bet you have quite a long middle name, James. I don't think I actually know what it is, but what little I know of your heritage, I bet there's more than one as well.
Tim, tell me, who's your hero?
My hero. Look, and I know you sort of wanted one in the context of not getting ripped off. So I think the person I would sort of point to in that, and of the media, but not quite of the media world that we inhabit. But one of the things that I noticed about being in Australia is what we lack, and I think it's a bit of a shame, is a Martin Lewis, as in money saving expert Martin Lewis. Such a credible force for stopping ordinary people from getting ripped off and championing just ordinary people against governments, against con people, everything like that. And what an incredible brand he's built for himself.
That's really interesting, because I do know somebody who fits that bill quite well, and actually maybe that you can make that person give him the fame through your outlets, and we'll see. I'll put you in touch.
Thank you.
Your best decision?
Going to live in Australia.
Oh, why?
Look, I mean, it happened. Actually, can I have two? Just thinking about it. One, so that happened about 20 years ago, just by chance. A job offer came up and I went, never been before, and it's a wonderful place. But then the other one, which I suppose is related, is ending up as a journalist. When I was only 18, so very early doors, I kind of decided to put off university for a while, which I'm still doing 35 years later.
And but it drew you in.
Well, my very first one was local newspapers. So the Aldershot News was the one that dragged me in. And then, yes, Hospital Doctor and Media Week in the UK and various other titles. But it was a route to a really interesting life. And that's the thing about journalism is that, it's not always terribly well paid, particularly in the early years, but it's never boring.
I really like that. What's your worst decision?
Worst decision? If I were to look at hours wasted over the last 2 to 3 years, I would say my worst decision is downloading the online version of, I don't know if you remember the board game Risk, but there's now a digital version, and barely a night goes by where I don't suddenly lose an hour to a quick game of Risk with a random person in Ukraine or something. So, and it turns out they're really good at doing battle, I've discovered.
Thank you for that. One more person, Tim. I'm going to ask you to recommend one more person for me to speak to on the podcast, but to do that, they have to come to a dinner first.
Now, the problem is this is a slightly meta suggestion, so you might reject it, particularly as they can't come to a dinner. I would be quite intriguing, and you'd have to pre-record half of it, but I'd like to hear you interview yourself.
I like it.
But if you want an alternative, then the only person who's ever been able to half explain quantum mechanics to me is Mark Holden from PhD.
I'd love to have Mark at a dinner party coming up soon. Tim, thank you very much for coming on this. I look forward to catching up with you shortly.
Thank you, James. It's been a pleasure.